Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Asatru Folk Assembly's weekly podcast, Victory Never Sleeps. I am Witan Brandy Callahan, filling in for the Alshira Godi tonight. And we have with us our esteemed lore teacher, Witan Svan Herul. How are you doing tonight, Svan?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So tonight
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about Freyr. And before we start talking about Freyr, can you give us just a real quick synopsis or summary of what his name means, where we find him first in our lore?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, it would be important to know that just like with Odin or Wotan or Wotan or Wothanas, as it's generally seen, going backwards in linguistic reconstruction. Excuse me, the clock. The the name of Freyr is kind of a latter half addition to the name Ingwaz or Ingui or Angus, or actually, excuse me, let me see. It's not Angus. It's amongst the Goths. He was known as. Let me check my notes here. Let me see. Angus. Yes, it is Angus with an E. So the understanding of Frey's name lineage going that far back denotes that he's been with our folk as far as a very, very, very long time. But the procession of Lord Frey coming out of or from Njord and of the Vanek line, that's where things I think get truly interesting. But his namesake has been with us and through multiple branches of all Indo-European languages, or early European Proto-Germanic languages, and they all have great similarities going all the way back to the Bronze Age. Obviously, fertility through phallic imagery, warlike, oftentimes sword-based, kingliness, and showing solar head effigies and boars, specifically like wild pigs. These three things, even though they're not written down, are often always clumped together on stone carvings, especially like in Ostergotland. They were, seen there, but it can't be marked that is Frey. But it is generally surmised because all of the imagery that's there, that's kind of connected together. But I would say first and foremost that people need to understand that there's technically two names to Frey. It's Ingvi Frey or Frey Ing, Fro Ing. The Frey part is, of course, coming from the title Lord. So it just means the Lord. And much like his sister Freya, it means the lady. But seeing that his core name also has survived in many other instances, not particularly in the Eddas, but elsewhere, especially in the sagas and in the Yingatals, the story of the kings of Sweden, there is mention of him being referred to as Ingvi Frey or Fro Ing. And so Ing is the focus that I would say most people have to look at. And that would actually be the true name. So with Lord Ing, and generally we just call him the Lord. And I think that's really important for our folk to understand. Because when we look at other things like if we talk about the Inglenook in England in relation to the fireplace, if we see obviously their connections to the Angles or the English or the Anglos, and we look into continental Germany, we see a lot more referencing to like Ing and Angus amongst the Goths, whereas when we start to cross the Baltic, we see more of a Freyr and a Frodi and even a Fricko, Fricco, but that actually has some debate as to whether or not that was just a Germanization at the time of Frey. So, and I would argue yes, because the author was translating for the continental Germans, so he used that name. So yeah, that's the biggest important thing I would say. Just that everyone needs to realize that when we do call Frey, we're calling him the Lord, and his I guess true name would be Ing, or Ingwas, or Ingwa, or Ingvi. You know, however, and Ingvi may also be just a joining of the word Ing and Ve, the holy space. So there is that.
Excellent, sir. Trent asks, Witan Svan, every Anglo-Saxon wants to know, does Freyr have any relationship to our tribal god known as Saxonot?
Ooh, hitting a hot button.
Leave it up to the East.
Yeah. The Saxonot mystery, Saxonot. Well, I mean, clearly we've already, I just mentioned that there is some imagery always associated with Ingvi or with Frey, and one of that would be, of course, the Sax, or the Sax sword, later kind of becoming a knife, and then later on in Iceland, Sax meant sword in and of itself. So to say a connection to the sword, very, very possible. However, there's some contenders in this debate when it comes to things like, as if, to lean towards Tiwa, or the Anglo-Saxon Tiu, as a another prime example of the possibility. During Charlemagne's conversion times, there was a prayer in which Saxonot is absolutely mentioned. As far as the connection to the Anglos, I mean, I would say out of the two, it would be much more of a stronger case to say that Freyr is, I don't want to say is Saxonot. Saxonot is, like I said, it's a contested thing. But I would say out of those two contenders, I would say yes. If we were talking about the imagery of the sword and of the connectivity of, or the power and gravity of Ingvi Freyr amongst the Anglos, then yeah, I would say that would have a great case. We do have to take into account, though, like when we talk about in Beowulf, when they mention that coming from across the Baltic Sea into Denmark, there is the hero shield sheafing, and sheafing, of course, makes reference to the binding of wheat. And again, the agricultural aspect connected to Frey throughout all of the Germanic branches is worth noting. So if there is a chance that they diverted that far into shield sheafing, or there's even speculation that shield sheafing might have been like an avatar or a physical manifestation of Frey, as was later seen in other, like in Sweden. The only problem is that there's no direct correlation to Saxonot being mentioned in any other connective elements or domains in which the Lord Frey has always taken precedent in our religion and in Germanic life in general amongst the Saxons. Again, it would be interesting, because if we talk about the Anglos as being, the sons of Ing or Eng, and then Saxons, of course, being Saxonot or having connection to Saxonot, then is this two tribes that were devoted to the Lord Frey and they joined together before they came across? I mean, there's a lot of speculation there. I honestly cannot place down an absolute answer on that. Way to throw the big one out there for us, Goathies. Right out the gate, I got hit with a wrench.
Goat the East always starting trouble right off the bat. Oh, we're kidding. We love you, Trent.
Ugh.
Tony asks, glad to see you both on here. How we doing tonight? Well, Tony, I'm doing pretty darn good. So we just had an outstanding Yule celebration at Baldershof last weekend. We had people from North Dakota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, Florida. We had some Njordshof folks up there, and that was an absolute treat to see them and meet them for the first time and share Yule with them. And we had a really great time. It was a beautiful event. The food was amazing. Mike from Njordshof and Stian from Baldershof just killed it in the kitchen. It was an old Julia Child's recipe that Stian had modified. And all the leadership served their folk in a 3-course meal, and it was absolutely beautiful. So you guys have Yule coming up as well, Svan, at Thorshof, yes?
Yes, we decided to take the weekend before Mother's Night as our scheduled weekend to do all things, and we've got a ton of stuff coming up too. We have a gigantic toy drive that one of our lovely folk builders, she organized it herself. She's just got tons of toys for the kids. She's got a huge coat drive going on as well, and then we have our monthly food drive going on. So all of that is going on during a kind of a 3-day event. But Saturday is the main day. We're expecting most people to arrive there. We're just going to have people there on Friday and on Sunday morning as well. And then we're going to be preparing for Yule tradition and kind of having classes on that about the strata of a 12-night Yule and where that comes from, and the kind of the debates around it and things like that.
Awesome. So, well, we have Yule coming up at Odinshof as well as Njordshof. So if you can make it to a Hof, weather permitting, please get a hold of those people. So there is still a Yule to be had at Odinshof. Get a hold of Ashley Stockton about that. And as far as Thorshof, we can get a hold of the Youngs and Svan, and they can probably get you information about that. And as far as Njordshof, get a hold of your Gothi Lane Ashby and the Plords, as well as Mike and Tracy, and they will get you guys all set up for Yule. Yule is one of those celebrations you definitely don't want to miss, especially at a Hof if you can make it. And second part of that question, Svan, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. No jets overhead, so that's good. I mean, all is well. Everything is good. Business is good. I've been blessed by Frey in many ways as far as prosperity and all good things. So excellent. I'm well.
Excellent. Kala asks, I see people naming pets after their after gods, Thor, Loki, etc. Loki is obviously bad, but is it blasphemy to do it with the other gods' names? So we've had some discussion about this recently. And we do understand that people have already named their children after gods or named pets after gods. And we are sure that it was done with the best of intentions. But the Asatru Folk Assembly's stance on that is our ancestors didn't name their pets and their children after gods. If you want to honor a god, absolutely, you can include their name within that name, but they were never actually named directly. So from a modern context, because obviously we don't just do everything our ancestors did, but for a modern context, when you use the name of a god, you do so in piety and in worship. So you are taking that name of Thor, of Odin, and you are giving it to a human being in a mundane world. And it takes a little bit of that shine from it. It takes a little bit of that piety from it. Now, we're not saying that if you've already named your children that you should rename your children, or we're not saying you need to change all your legal documents, but what we're saying is take heed when you're naming your children or your pets or anything after the gods themselves. The gods are absolutely powerful beings, powerful gods, and taking that into a mundane world changes that. Svan, can you give us some examples of how towns, children, things like that utilize the names of our gods previously? How was that done before?
Well, I mean, I think most everybody is really, really familiar with it. The biggest thing to understand is how all present it is. At the same time, the way that it's so clearly done, it's kind of embarrassing in another way. Like if you are naming your child solely and singularly after one of the gods, or if you're naming one of your pets after the gods, which I think is in poor taste in general there as well. But throughout all the lore, you don't have to go but 2 inches into the lore anywhere, and you'll start to notice a pattern. And it's so clear that anything otherwise is kind of, again, embarrassingly just ominous, the elephant in the room. We look back, we see Thorstein, Thorbjorn, we see Freydis, we see so many different examples of the names of the gods being used in conjunction with other elements to make names. Same always when it comes to temples, when it comes to hills, when it comes to towns near the ocean or near a river or up on a hill. They're always kind of connected with, but never singularly done. And it's a pattern that is subtle in the sense that if you're not looking for it, or if, to be honest, a lot of people come into Asatru and they're perhaps coming from a rejection of monotheism. They're coming from a rejection of universalism. So they're coming in with this kind of branch being pulled. All their life, they're kind of getting pulled in one direction, and then it gets released, and they kind of fling off into another direction. Or at least they're equalizing out now, and they're starting to understand the premise of divinity and of faith. But they're still kind of lacking a sense of what might be just general common knowledge of what is pious or what piety is outside of a Christian realm. And they might also just not kind of understand culturally or even ancient culture of why we don't do that. So, I would say, as this question is just kind of popping up on me, the first and foremost is that there's always link names. And there's always kind of heighties and different names. Like, for instance, when Freya is called the Vanadis, and the Dis is like a goddess or a spinner of fate, one who controls the luck and the overall abundance of a people, and she is the Dis of the Vana. So that makes perfect sense since she's a Vanir, and so there's things that you can hide in there. And it was seen as more normal. Another interesting thing is there's very few names after Odin in the Old Norse. I would say even in the Anglo, there's not a lot of connection. Generally, any connections to him was done through simply like the general word for God, like Os. So Oswald being, like the leader or the forest of the gods, or Oscar being the spear of the gods, and things like that. Again, link words. So yeah, I think it's in poor taste to do it singularly. And I think that we should really take a collection of old, names. You can go to any name site. Go to my favorite one is called behindthename.com. It's one of the greatest name sites I've ever found. I could peruse that for hours. And it just gives you the etymology of tons of names, and you'll notice very, very quickly that, even though they do have the gods' names listed up there, their usage, which has a chart generally on the bottom, is empty. So it's not necessarily used at all. And that's something worth noting. And you can find great traditional names, elsewhere. I think that should be reserved for the gods. And especially in the context of modern time now. Yes, we're talking about Frey, we're talking about Yngvi Frey, we're talking about Engus amongst the Goths, or Ingvar, or all of these things. I think it would be important for us to consider like understanding the names of our gods at this context now also means we passed through a threshold. Asatru's changed. And it's modern now. We're in a modern world. We're doing modern things. And so we take what we have from the past as sacred, especially considering how, I guess, endangered, or that's perhaps not quite the right word, but there is a looming sense that that we must have the duty of keeping our history alive and clear. So I think we should extend that, especially in the concept of names.
So Nick asks, so I've got 2 stories for the purpose or main aspect of charming of the plow, with the main, with the main one being the story of Gefjon, but also with the holiday having aspects of Freyr, specifically with his fertility and virility and the act of plowing the field in a different sense. Not asking which of the 2 the holiday is about, because he suspects it's both, but can you explain and elaborate in general? So as far as Gefjon being part of Charming of the Plow, yes, I usually do my Charming of the Plow bloat to Gefjon. I think she's really great for that particular holiday. I do blessings of tools, but I also do the blessings of the hands to be industrious and whatever that may be that we use to plow, whether it's, your hands are just as important tools as the pen you use, the computer you use, the plow itself. But as far as Frey being part of that, as plowing the field in a different sense, Svan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to be fair and honest, I think first and foremost we have to look at the origin of Charming of the Plow, where it comes from. Anglo-Saxon England post-conversion. So Christianity is in full swing, churches everywhere. And it's marked down and noted that they're doing something called the acrebot, or the blessing of the acreage or the plots of land. And that is at the core, the inspiration of the modern Asatru holiday of Charming of the Plow. So first and foremost, we have that. And in that, there actually isn't any mention of Freyr. There is a mention of Nerthus, or as she is referred to in the poem as Ersa, which again, connection to linguistics, is Eartha. Same as the Nordic, I guess, equivalent would be Yarda or Yarth, the yard, where we get the word yard from. So the earth is first and foremost mentioned in that ritual. And there is a digging of furrows, and there is a placing of the last of the grains from the year before into the ground, in hopes of gaining blessing. But what we see here is a transference of the seed and the wheat of last year into the ground for the new year. So there is connectivity there between the idea of the germination of the seed into the ground, and connection also with the plow, making that formulation of the idea of the masculine and the cosmic coming down into the natural order and into the fertile earth. And so there's tons of connections there that have absolute validity. But when we move away from the acrebot itself, what we also see is a connection to the plow in reference to the story in the Gylfaginning, in which King Galfi runs into Gefjon. Gefjon's name means the giver. And one of the things that I think we as hard polytheists have to understand is that there is a stratification of the gods that always correlate in the realm of that which is cosmic order and the sky and of fire and the wind. And there is a natural law that is exemplified through the earth and through water in the ground. And so we see this stratification happen above and in the middle world. And so Gefjon is another stratification of the primordial, which is the earth. That's another thing I think people need to wrap their heads around, is that our gods are they are stewards, they are wardens, they are responsible by merit and by deed over great primordial powers. So we don't necessarily say like, oh, that rock is said god. We see the gods as primordial. They rule over primordial forces that are all conjuncting into the center middle world. So Gevion, again, is one of the aspects of the earth. And I think it's most important that when I see Gevion, and what we're talking about is the bordering of land, where she takes out Zealand from the bottom of Sweden. And what I think really Gevion is as an Asanya too is I feel I have seen her manifest in our folk over and over and over again, even though they might be Christian, and we can see this manifestation happening over and over again. When you see the woman floating above the caravan of wagons, to manifest destiny, when you see Columbina, standing on the pedestal with the shield and with a scepter or with a sword, and saying, "Will you defend her?" and with the American flag on the shield. These are all real aspects, I think, of what the giver Geviona is. And so again, Charming of the Plow is about taking land, is about what you can plow and what you are tending and taking over, what you're responsible for. And so Gevion has sanctity in the idea that she is that which gives and that which you must give in return in order to gain bounty. And so I see that as the plottage or acreage or boundary of the land or of your farm or homestead. And then when we talk about Freyr in the representation of the plow from the sky into the earth, then we can see the correlation there between Freyr and Gerður. And then also too, we also see the aspect of Nerthus being the giving earth, as plowing through the earth in order to upset her, to wake her out of her catharsis state of the winter, arouse her from the slumber, if you will. And so you see this theme happening over and over and over again, and it happens through cyclic sides of our faith. When we talk about the Vana, when we talk about the I guess chthonic or natural law, earth and water side, you see these cycles happening over and over and over again. So they all have connection. And I think that's another thing that people need to wrap their heads around about modern Asatru, is that we have so many sources, because we've had great people in the beginning of Asatru coming back, studying these things, and then bringing them together, almost like twining them like a rope. You get one strand, it's weak, but you put a bunch of strands together and you've got a strong, solid understanding of a pan-European tradition. And then we move forward from there. So yeah, I think all of those elements have absolute validity. And as long as, you have these people that are like, well, actually it's the acre bot, and, and I brought it up. I said Freyr wasn't mentioned in that. Actually, he was never mentioned. And it's like, it's frustrating, because it's like they're picking apart things in order to sort of establish some sense of like authority, when in reality it's I would say the stronger move is to go, okay, yeah, we've taken that and this and all of that and wound it together, because we've had the ability in our time now, in modern time, to look and see what we've got. We've got tons of stuff, and yeah, we're going to use it all. Like, it's just kind of more of a I would say an alpha mindset, is to go in and say, yeah, that's good. I like that. I like all of that. We're going to bring it all to the table. We're going to form it together, and then we're going to move forward with it as a people. End of story. So, yeah.
Speaking of holidays, what do you believe would be, quote unquote, the best holidays to celebrate Lord Frey?
Well, I again, Charming of the Plow has its understanding that Charming of the Plow is actually the beginning of a cycle. I mean, we have a lot of different ways that we can look at the year. The Germanic concept of the summer tiding, winter tiding. So we can see them in two forms, in which we would see the midsummer being the height of the summer tide, and we would see Yule as the height of the winter tide. But there's also other ways that our ancestors, and I think we could look at it, Obviously, we had the romantic or Romanish ideal of the 4-quartered year. But one cycle that I definitely think people need to kind of get into themselves is that Charming of the Plow is about setting the ground for when Ostra throws open the gates and lets the warmth comes through. Once that you're setting the ground, Freyr is coming. He's the Varalta god, the god of the world. You know, he comes from Leosarheim, where he is the king of. He comes into the middle realm, and all things begin. And so from there to Freyfaxi, which is more or less seeing the end. So, you know, you could choose either one of those. Freyfaxi, Charming of the Plow, or some people call it Loafmas, the massing of the loaves, but that's actually a post-Christian, name for it. All of these, I think, have pertinence to honoring Frey, but understanding that it's the cycle, it's the beginning and the end, the recession, the coming forth, the light beaming out, coming into the world would be Charming of the Plow. And then the receding. And we see that again in like songs like John Barleycorn and the Sacrifice of John Barleycorn. So both of those, I would say, are very prominent holidays. More so, though, I would say Freyfaxi. Obviously, modern Asatru's taken Freyfaxi as, correlative to Frey, even though, I mean, historically, the name itself is actually the name of a horse that was in dedication to him. But that still is a kenning for the hair of the horse, which was the color of hay or the color of wheat. So it was most likely a blonde, golden Icelandic horse, stout and with goldish hair. So I would definitely say Freyfaxi. And Charming of the Plow as well. I mean, you can't really separate the two.
Right. Tony asks, I understand why gold was chosen for our gods on the murals, but why was red for our mortal heroes? Were there any other colors considered? Svan, you're our expert in the art and you do the art. How can you talk to us about that?
It was simple. Blood. It was the banding of blood. The idea that the mortal realm, the color red. There's lots of different indications for the color of red, whether we're talking about love or might or strength. But in this case, it's reference to blood, which is an important element in the birthright of our faith and in our folk heroes being exonerated amongst the folk. And for multiple of reasons, whether it's, of course, not relenting from their faith, even under extremely dire situations, or having some sort of sight beyond the veil, a deep connection spiritually, the mysticism of their connection to the gods is still being studied or trying to be understood, or perhaps they had some great historical significance that was a milestone within our faith. So red was chosen as the exemplary color of blood. Actually, I don't think there was any other discussion of the color. It was kind of more or less, are we going to have a symbol that would correlate an exalted sense of understanding amongst our heroes? And immediately we thought of the Sonnenrod, the 12-spoke Sonnenrod, but in red to symbolize them being folk and being of the blood. And that was it. That's how it stuck.
All right. Another question we've got here. I heard Yule was historically celebrated in January. Does the AFA do that? No, the Asatru Folk Assembly celebrates Yule in December. We celebrate Thorblot in January. I'm going to ask Nick, there it is. Pop that up there, runestone.org/calendar. You will not only find out what the official and observed dates of celebration are, but you will also find write-ups on all of the heroes, as well as write-ups on all of the holidays. Our Godar put a lot of work into that. Specifically, Githia, Catherine Erickson has put a lot of work into that, as has Svan. giving you an outline. If you click on those links, it'll give you a summary of the holiday itself or a summary of the hero that is honored that month.
Also, there will be insider baseball for anybody that's coming to watch the podcast tonight. There is also a chance for people, if they want to learn the solar lunar perpetual calendar of the Iron Mark, will be in the back of that calendar, so that you can post it up on a wall and learn how to run that along with the Gregorian classical Western calendar. So.
Excellent. All right. So if you are watching us on YouTube, also know that we are streaming on Entropy as well. If you want to check us out on there, you can throw us a donation if you like. We're going to answer your questions whether you donate or not. But if you donate, we'll answer your question next. We're also streaming on Twitter, VK, and we're also in Odyssey as well. We have social media galore that we're always active on. You can find us on MeWe. You can find us on Twitter, on VK, on Odyssey. You can find us on Gab, I believe. We're trying to be everywhere that the folk are so that we can give you as much information as we can. Kala asks...
Oh, wait, do we answer the Yule question by...
Oh, no, we didn't. Svan, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I do, because that's how I was like...
I see it
wait.
I see it. Go ahead.
So, Finn, that's a great question. First and foremost, by technicality, January, no, not at all. But I say by technicality. When we're talking about the Anglo-Saxon Yule, which is spelled Geol, and the G is actually a Y sound, so it's Yule or Yeol. The lunar calendar that was used, that meant Yule Manav or Yule month. Drifted. It wasn't comparable to the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar is pretty confusing as it is in and of itself with all of its iterations, but the drifting of Yule Manav amongst the Gregorian calendar would mean that, sure, it probably did at some points fall in January, but it most likely fell, or more predominantly fell, in what would be the 10th month, Deca, or December. Again, the weirdness of the Gregorian calendar, because it's the 12th month, but you get what I'm getting at, is that it drifts in there. And so far as we know, we have the speaking of Modranat, Mother's Night, and most likely Yule was celebrated at the full moon in Yule month, or at least the day before the full moon, through the full moon, and it kind of ended at the end of full moon. And we don't have a lot of attestments to this. So, when we talk about Yule, as far as what month it might have fallen in, on a lunar calendar as it shifts, that's the big debate. It's worth noting, though, our ancestors saw the world and the year much like a macro of the day. So our ancestors back then didn't have like the modern timekeeping, so they saw the next day as being at sunset. And so the new year of the year was actually around winter nights or winter finding. I mean, in between, like, I would say early October timeframe to like early November. And that was the sunset of the year. And so they often considered that to be the new year. But like modern Asatru is kind of, well, it's adapted and changed, and science has kind of helped us. So now we don't consider the next day to be at sunset because that's too variable. And we have midnight. And so the midnight of the year would then transfer, to be around Yule time. I think that was a natural correlation that our folk and our people have done. And so when you have people saying, the New Year's is on, on winter nights, it's like, yeah, we know it was. But midnight is now, and this is now, and it correlates better too. It makes us not so foreign amongst non-Asatru Western folk that our Yule correlates as a turning of the year, and it ends, if we're doing the 12-month, or even if we're just doing the 3 days, it ends at the end of the Gregorian calendar almost, perfectly. Especially like in the Iron Mark, the turning of the year is on Mother's Night. And the first 12 nights, once you're done with the first 12 nights, well, the Gregorian calendar turns over. So it helps everyone kind of stay together. And so we're not some foreign group trying to, mete out our little pie and pushing everyone out. We want people to understand the way we do things. So yes, I just wanted to answer that as technically it probably fell in January a couple of times throughout the long extension of that, but it's not, you can't place a Gregorian month on the Anglo-Saxon lunar calendar, and it most predominantly fell in the last 12th month.
All right, Katla asks, is there a connection with Freyr to Enki? Enki as ancient Sumeria was a god, and his name meant Lord of the Earth, and he was the head of those gods. Enki sounds similar to Freyr's names.
Okay, yeah, I've heard this question asked about Ingi or Angus. I think that the biggest correlation that we might have to look at is that there might be a similarity there based on where that all comes from. If you're talking about the Hittites and the Luwians, they are a proto, or they were of an Indo-European origin, and so therefore their language has a lot of that. Now, just like the Aryans that moved into India, and they ended up having some admixture with the people that lived there, so did the Proto-Indo-Europeans that moved down into the Middle East, and then they ended up mixing a lot with people south of there. So I would say that, and I'm not a learned scholar on Sumerian gods or Babylonian gods, and I know that there's a lot of kind of stigma against that. And I see Christians try to use that a lot of the time because, remember, Christianity is a subsect of Judaism, and Judaism, they were enslaved by the Babylonians, and so they have a tendency to demonize everything that they correlate them with, whether it's the Canaanites and the Syrian, Phoenicians, or if we're talking about the Babylonian Sumerians. All of that is demonized, even though we're using the Greek word for it wrong. I would look into the correlation of whether or not Enki has the foundations of that religiosity coming from the Hittites and the Luwians. If it is, absolutely, I would say there's a connection. However, it could also be coincidental based on these things. I mean, there's people that try to correlate, and this could happen. Like, perfect example. In modern day Asatru, there are some people that try to correlate Vali with Valentine's Day. There's no connection whatsoever. It has absolutely no meaning. It's a pure coincidence that Vali and Valentine have kind of they start with a V, and so there could be some essence of that happening there. It happens quite a lot when people do retrograding of things, but I would say, looking at the Hittite Luwian connection or any mention of that, because there's even mentions in the Bible, in the Tanakh in the Old Testament, about how the people of Judea couldn't conquer up in the north because of the chariots of iron, and so that's most likely a reference to those people. And if that's where he sources from, then there could very well be a correlative sense, not a direct connection. I don't think that there was some sort of migratory religiosity that moved from that space up into the Nordic lands, but that you have to remember most of our stuff comes from a core and then spreads out in branches. And so there would be a parallel correlation linguistically and purposefully. So yeah, I wouldn't shoot that down, but I would have to look into that, and I will look into that, actually. So,
all right. Ryan asks, question: I am mostly way done with making a video about making a grove of Thor with oak trees. Do you think it's doable to get several folks together and buy the saplings and fertilizer? What do you think?
ooh.
I mean, I think that's entirely up to you and the dedication of your folk right there. I will say what I do think is a beautiful thing is folk getting together to do things like that. I also think it would be great if you guys got together and donated an oak tree to Thorshof. To be honest, I think that would be amazing. That, part of that grove that you guys have, send one of those saplings to Thorshof.
Or vice versa too. We could send an acorn from the oak at Thorshof to be at the grove. I think there would be a great interconnectivity there. That's a cool devotional project. It's pretty hefty.
Yes, I think that's a great idea to do something like that. I mean, that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of financial responsibility, and anything that you can do to bring the folk together like that, I think that's a great thing. And I definitely would recommend pulling Thorshof into that, or vice versa. What do you think, Svan?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say if you're talking about like getting folks together for the saplings and the fertilizer and things like that, if you're looking for help, absolutely, I would say go to Folk Builders, go to any Gothar, contact me, and I'd love to talk to you about this. Any chance to make a video in honor to Thor would be awesome. As far as like getting funds and things together, like that would go from in a planning stage of how you were planning on doing it and who you wanted to get involved with, and how you wanted to be involved with it. I think that, or making those connections privately so that we could find out your location and we could see what we could do about logistics. That would be very cool. But I don't understand. You're making the video, but the grove hasn't been planted yet, or are you videotaping the progress of it? That's the only question I would have about that.
Mm.
But that sounds awesome.
Caitlin asks, what is the difference between Odinism and Asatru? What's the difference, Svan? Give me your feedback.
You want to take it, or you want?
I'll let you go, sir. I like to hear.
Yeah, we've had this question asked before, and I don't mind repeat questions. I think they're great because they do reiterate or give us a chance to reiterate and establish what the AFA is doing, is making a point that we are the axis mundi of our church. Big surprise. We are the center of our church because we are our church. So when we state what we see and what we believe, it's important that we be clear. Odinism, again, there is a plethora of names that were brought about during the modern revival of the believing in the faith of the Teutonic gods. And a lot of people didn't quite have a set thing. It was a smorgasbord, if you will, of things to do. And so some folks have chosen to go with Odinism as the title. And Odinism is, I would say, the same thing as Asatru, especially in correlation with the AFA. But in its name, it's kind of, I would say, misplaced. It's not a religion entirely based upon the worship of Odin. We are hard polytheists. We believe in a nexus of divine powers that work in and out and through and around. And so to singularity name it is kind of just more, I guess, a nuanced misnomer. And so that's why we move towards Asatru. We're true to all of the Aesir, all of the gods. And so we find Asatru to be a better title. But yet still we have I don't think any particular issues. Like, there are people that come to AFA events, they're members of the AFA, and they say they're heathens, or they say they're Odinists, or they say they're Wodinists. And I think at an individual level, if that's the way somebody wants to describe themselves, that's okay. But I don't think it's ultimately the best path. I think the Asatru Folk Assembly has kind of set down, no, Asatru is about being trothful to the gods, to the Aesir. This is the best name for it. But yes, as far as denominational differences, there isn't a lot. Most Odinists, whether I don't honestly know of any Odinist organizations that are around or active or doing anything. And I mean, not that that's I mean, it's just kind of, I remember back in the 90s, there were quite a few groups, especially like newsletters and on the internet as it was just budding towards the end of the 90s, early 2000s. And then they just kind of, I don't know, went away. People, I guess, got older, or maybe perhaps they joined the AFA and then that was just kind of like a transference of natural, like everyone getting together and organizing and unifying under one banner. So the difference between them is very nuanced. It's just, I would say, more or less a choosing of names in the early times of the revival and the reconstruction of the faith. And, I've heard Fornseder or Fornseder, the old path, which, I guess would be a great nomenclature for if you were talking to an outsider and saying, well, this is our old way. This is just the way we do things. But Asatru takes more of a stance of us, when we have to arrive to do, when we go to a hospital for the last rites over somebody who's passing. And if you have some guy showing up in a tunic and like a Smurf hat or something, and everyone there they're going to be looking at like, leather booties and leg wraps. It's going to be it's not seen. People just can't quite wrap their way around it. So that's why a lot of the AFA, we take on Western, and I mean modern Western apparel. We wear suits. We have ties. We don stoles, which are Greek in origin. So, we take the modern Westernism and add it into it. And I think that's another thing that differentiates us from other groups, and how they operate as far as our presence and the seriousness of what we're doing. So
you bring up talking about, explaining to people who may not be familiar with Asatru, talking about it as the old ways, or this is our folk way. And that's great. But one thing that you do need to remember when you are explaining it that way, if you use the word Asatru, they'll ask you what that means. And that includes the relationship with the gods itself. Just saying that these are all old folk ways, that I don't believe gives the religiosity behind it. The old folk ways may be our songs and our food and our dances and our customs and our traditions. And yes, honoring our gods because that's what they did, but it's not part of the name, and it's not something that, well, this is just something my ancestors did. There's a good possibility, if they don't understand the religiosity of it, that they're just gonna think that you're trying to keep a culture alive, which you are. But I always want to make sure we use the word Asatru because it implies that religiosity to it.
Yeah, there's a willful manifestation instead of a passive kind of, well, this is just what my folk have always done. It's like, no, I'm Asatru, like I'm truthful and trothful to my gods, mm-hmm. and take a stance, a strong stance.
Right. Ketty asks, Svan, are you aware of any gods from the Iberian Pantheon similar to Freyr, or of how the Spanish Peninsula may have celebrated ceremonies similar to charming of the plow?
This is, well, it's interesting because first and foremost, Central Europe, and then eventually with the Roman, spike coming up over the Alps, Europe was sent into a tizzy. We basically had three, polytheistic societies fighting each other in a way. And so, as the Romans kind of pushed the Gaulish people westward into the Iberian Peninsula, you have a connection, of the Iberian Gallic. Now, as far as names go, if you're starting in, say, like Spain or Portugal, you might be looking at, names that, that start out more phonetically connected to that language, maybe even with some Latin elements to it. But you need to work your way back ultimately to what I would say continental Gaulish, like pantheonic gods. And of course, when we talk about the gods like the Gauls and the Slavs and even the Hellenics or the Greco-Roman, we see them as cousins. And so we see them as, again, parallel branches. And, you know, there's a lot of great respect now, considering all of our collective history together, for bad or for good. I mean, I know there's obviously a lot of Germano and Teutonic versus Gallic historical past that we could bring up in a heartbeat, and people would start pointing fingers about things that happened long, long ago. And yes, we do have a modded history, but I think it's a good thing for all people to find the gods of their folk. And if you find the gods of your folk from the Iberian Peninsula to be a closer and more linguistically connective power, there's nothing wrong with that. As far as my knowledge of that, the only correlative thing I remember is, and here's the thing is, I don't know if I'm butchering the name, because again, I come from my root. I come from my branch. So when I start stepping into other people's branches, please forgive me on the idea that I might be butchering names or pronunciations. The worship of Cernunnos or Cernunnos, and the cauldron, the man with the antlers upon the cauldron holding the two snakes. I'm not 100% sure if that is a continental Gaulish god or if that's an Isle, like Scottish, Irish. And I don't think he was, unless it maybe perhaps the Welsh. But correlatively, you know, it's kind of hard. The Gauls transferred over into the islands before the Teutons came over, as the, you know, with the Anglos and the Saxons. So linguistically, that's kind of hard to place for me. Actually, Witan Callahan might have a fair amount of knowledge. I know you're more of the Isles understanding of the Gaulish religion.
Sort of. I mean, I'm better on the Slavic side. So, you know, people say I know a lot about Celtic lore. I really don't. I think it's the red hair.
Oh.
So
I heard it once, and then I was like, okay, well, I'll go to her for you just got voluntold.
I'm layman's terms. I mean, I've got the books, but they've been a while since I read them. But no, I don't think I would have anything to add on the Iberian Peninsula or anything like that.
Yeah, I really wish, like, right now, like, it's kind of rude for me to just start going on to a phone or something like that right now during a podcast to, like, figure this out. But I do that, like, all the time during certain calls, or, like, even when I'm, like, you know, getting into debates.
Let me ask you, Svan, what stanza is this in the Locusetta? And you're like, give me 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And you it in 30 seconds.
Yeah, then you know, like interpretations and things like that. And then of course too, like I have some Old Norse books that I really pull from in order to help with. There was somebody mentioning about an odd statement on Thorpe's messaging where he's in the Havamal, where he talks about don't give eye stock to a man. And what that meant was, when you look at the Old Norse word, it means side glances from your eyes, meaning like don't conspire against a guest when they come into the hall. But it was just a weird choice of them, like the word stock, like taking stock of the situation. So, I mean, it's like itchy. I want to like dig immediately on Enki, and I want to dig immediately on the Iberian Peninsula. But
I'm the same way. I have this fascination with old books that are no longer published anymore, and like published in the 1890s and the 1910s and things like that. So I'm a real big forgotten books fan. Right. So I know I have one, and my fingers are going, okay, I know exactly where this book is.
Yeah, I would just say the biggest thing would be to look at continental Gaulish religion, and it's very, very based more on, I think, you know, there's more the intermingling of the Romanish lifestyle. When we see a lot of the matroni worship in the reliefs that were done, and we see that the triplet female Disir, or female mothers, or the fates, or the, you know, however they might be interpreted by both sides, you find a lot of stuff there when we talk about like the gods Tuisto and Tyrannus, and Essus amongst like the tripartite of the continental Gauls is very different than like say the Irish or Welsh, because by the time they started really putting their things down, they had already euhemerized all their gods into being like chieftains. So there is validity there, though. The Iberian Peninsula, and also bear in mind, there's validity on the Teutonic side too, because after doing almost a full cycle around Europe, the Vandals ended up settling in the Iberian Peninsula as well. And so there was an influx of Germanic Western expansion. But those guys were, you know, a lot of them had worked for the Roman army. They were probably foederati that had moved westward and, you know, eventually settled in there. And also the Goths settled in there as well. So there's validity on the Teutonic side as well as the Gallic or Celtic title for the Spaniards or Spaniard Portugal. Very interesting question, though. And I think that one thing, too, is that we do have folk who are part of Asatru that are in Spain. And we, you know, I think it's a really great area that a lot of people don't realize has a lot of deep connections both to the Gallic people and to the Teutonic people, especially when you travel up through the northern areas. You see a lot of place names, you see a lot of you know, historical sites, and you also see it in the people amongst those people in northern Spain. So great area. I think it would be awesome, you know, as we do more of these. Chime in, let me know. I'll see if I can. I'm going to write this stuff down, and I might actually, like, if there's a break edgewise, I'm be like, oh, also from question from last time, see if I can't shed some light on it. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, we have got a donation from Lawrence Forbes on Entropy. Gave us a $10 Canadian. We appreciate that very much, sir. And said, good evening, Brandy and Svan. No question. Just wanted to say, very interesting stream tonight. Your wisdom, knowledge, and service to our folk is greatly appreciated. Thank you, sir. We appreciate you as well. It is people like you that, you know, supports the Asatru Folk Assembly and therefore supports the Aesir. I always say every gift to the Asatru Folk Assembly is literally a gift to the gods. We are building their temples with your gifts, and we thank you for that.
Thank you.
We've mentioned Charming of the Plow a few times. So I think we should plug Charming of the Plow that's coming up. We are going to have Charming of the Plow this year in Florida. Tickets are on sale at runestone.org. So go over to runestone.org and go into the products, and you can get your Charming of the Plow at Njordhof. That is going to be this 2023, February 3rd through 5th. So definitely check that out. It's going to be the first Charming of the Plow at Njordhof, and it's going to be one to remember and one for the history books. So please go check that out. While you're over there spending money, I would like you to also visit the Folk Services Fund and our South Africa Fund. Those are two other things that you can definitely share your hard-earned money that you sacrifice for. Go over to runestone.org and donate, and you're going to see the Asatru Academy. You're going to see each one of the Hofs will be there. Frey's Hof was there. Sigerheim is there. Our South African Fund is there. And very importantly, our folk services. So it's a very, very hard time of year financially for a lot of our folk. This tends to be the leanest time of year, just as it was for our ancestors. I think it is for us now. And if you can, and if you're willing, please go over to that folk services and donate. That money does go to our folk that are in need for things that they've got going on, and to try to help them out. So while you're over there buying your Charming of the Plow ticket, drop a $10 into that folk services, and that would be greatly appreciated. Or any of the other great things that you can go donate to on that site as well. All right, we have got another question. This one's going to be from Sarah. Is the lessons of Freyfaxi the importance of understanding how serious making an oath truly is? I believe that's a big part of the story, yes. What I also personally believe on this also is what it means when you yourself don't take the oath of another person seriously enough, and the consequences of that as well. We see an oath being made regarding Freyfaxi, but we also see someone else not taking that oath seriously enough and paid the consequences for that. Svan, what do you think about that?
I'm a little confused by the question. I'm trying to think in correlation to Skirnismal and the story between Frey and Gerd, or are the oathing during Freyfaxi. I'm trying to like pinpoint exactly where that is. If we're talking about the Skirnismal, then everything you just said, absolutely. When we talk about the oathing, and when we understand about what it means, we're talking about the oath of the earth to the seed, when the seed comes in is embraced by the earth, and how hard it is for the seed to enter the earth, and the struggle that it takes in order to become the ripe field. I think that's a huge part of that story. When we talk about Freyfaxi, as far as I guess, yes, through Skirnismal, I would agree. That I was just trying to figure out exactly which way was she referring to this. But yes, as far as Skirnismal, I think it's the oath between the earth and the receiving that the earth takes of the seed, which is in essence the story, is playing about the struggle of the seed trying to break into the ground, and the cold, the unrelenting, unforgiving earth, and how the struggle of this tiny seed through by way of Skirnir being the bright and shining one, is kind of a predecessor to this process. The light brings forth the fruitation of the seed. So yeah.
Corey asks, what is your favorite story of Freyr and why? What's your favorite story, Svan? Mine is him finding his wife and her heart melting in the end. That's my favorite story.
Yeah, Skirnismal that's a big one. That is the big one. Yeah, and I think when a lot of people read it, they take different things away from it, and some of it's good, some of it's bad. Clearly, right there, what you just said, the melting of the rime ice of Gerda, whereas and I take it as the struggle of the seed to gain into the earth, like the literal seed, not making any allegoric code talk there. I'm talking, I feel like it does to me that the perennial truth of that story is about the light warming the earth and then making way for the true power of Yngvi Frey, which is the microcosmic germ or seed that brings forth life. And when we talk about if you're into runes, that's a great story because there's some interesting stuff there that the poetics, they've placed in there. When we talk about some of the rune curses that are levied at Gerd, and the beaming light coming out from Frey's hall. The whole story is awesome. First off, Freyr going to sit in Odin's throne. Nobody does that. Freyr does that. he does it. And but the price of that, when you have the precipice to see from the throne of battle, but interestingly enough, he doesn't see battle. He sees Gerda. The source of him, who he is, I think, is also exemplified on the precipice. We know that in Adam of Bremen's mentioning of Fricko or Frey, he also refers to Wotan as rage. And so when Woden or Odin sits upon the battle precipice, we know what he's looking for. We know what is to be seen. And battles between brothers, we see it right now. So, but when Freyr goes up there, he sees from, I think, what his true core is. Even upon the precipice of battle, he still looks forward into the east and into the middle realm, and he sees love, and he sees the shining ice maiden. Her name means the guard, the enclosed space, and he falls detrimentally in love because he grows sad. And then, of course, a lot of people are they try to presentize this situation in which Freyr sends his man Skirnir to propose a meet between this this common girl, and yes, it's written to be theatrical and euhemerized in that sense, but there's a lot more going on here than some kids at the roller rink going, hey, like, tell that girl I really like her. And for people to take it just at that flat level, kind of it's funny and it's tongue in cheek, but it also is kind of annoying. Like, that's not the only thing that's going on here. But and looking at the name Skirnir, meaning the bright and shining one, the glinting ray, we know what's going on. This is the process of, like, around the time between Charming and the Plow and Astra, when the gates are open, that light shines in, and from, I'll get into this in a little bit later, but yeah, I mean, that whole process, there's so much stuff in that story that is just phenomenal. And the poetics of it are great. And I mean, it sounds like when you hear Skirnir, propositioning Gerda with this curse, and he's talking about, the thirst runes that he's going to carve against her, and every mead that she goes to drink is going to turn into the foul liquid from the bladder of goats. I mean, a lot of people are like, what is going on with it? Well, they don't realize what this is the struggle between the light warming up the earth. I mean, that's really what's going on. But the poetics in there are pretty savage. I mean, the writing of this is phenomenal. And I mean, just peak essence of, like, Nordic poetics going on there, where they're just painting this picture for everyone to hear. And you could just imagine people in the benches going, whoa, like, holy crap. Like, that's what it was for. It was a shock value. And but again, Gerda doesn't relent. She says, no, I don't care. I don't care if he has money. I don't care about this. I don't care about that. And so again, it shows Nordic societal relationships. It shows about how relationships were perceived back then. You read the sagas, and it's always a young man sending a friend to the father, because it's illegal to kill the friend. Like, it's if the father kills the suitor because he's, a craven person in the community or whatever, it had less of a stance than if it was just a third party. So again, you have this societal mentioning of Skirnir, but kind of being the man that goes in, and he originally tries to present himself to the household, and it's Gerda that runs the household. Her father is not there, and she states to him, my father's well off. I don't need the money. I don't need any of this. So you see a playing out of a societal chemistry of the time. It's just like when Thor gets his hammer and it gets it placed upon his lap because of the wedding. Well, I mean, there's no reason for that to actually be the case. It's nodding towards a ceremonial thing that was present at the time. So it's story-wise, I think a lot of people, when they read that. So yes, the Skirnir Small, I'm in agreement with you. It is awesome. I could go on for forever on that one.
I think what Sarah was asking about with a previous question, I think she was asking about actually Freyfaxi, the horse itself. And is the lesson yes, the lesson of that horse dying, or the lesson of Freyfaxi, the importance of understanding how serious making an oath truly is. Yes, but not only your oath, because of the things that you have to do to maintain it and the sacrifices you have to maintain it, but what happens when other people don't take your oaths as seriously as you do. That's what I think wrong with that.
Well, I mean, it reflects a kind of karma versus dharma. I mean, if you look at the story and you see how he was acting in the area, his actions were not very honorable. He was making a lot of enemies, and even the other Gothis, and of course back then the Gothi was also to a landowner and a speaker of the law and probably conducted rights in his own area, but he's making enemies across the board. And so in a way, his oath that he made was the ultimate undoing to his prosperity. And so I think ultimately it was a punishment based around the idea that your deeds, your correct actions you're going against correct action, and this oath that you made is going to end up binding you to the overall return of those incorrect actions. And eventually he did. I mean, he ended up, you know, the Gothis that killed the horse, and he ended up moving over to the eastern side of Iceland, and he did make a substantial return back to I guess sustainability, and he even got a little revenge against some of his enemies, but ultimately he was worse off than when he started. And I think that, you know, is the point of that, is that when you make these oaths are a way to build your luck, your hamingya, and to break them does drain that luck. But more so too, you have to remember that sometimes the oaths that you make are fated and leave a wake. Once you make that oath, as weird goes on, there's a wake that follows in that oath, and that wake can affect other things, and it I think it does. And I think that's how the gods do mete out or measure out our doom. They do so. I don't believe that the gods see us in a post-life sense. I don't think that they judge us in death. I think they judge us in life. I think they see us now, and an oath standing creates wake, and that wake can be messed with, especially if you're not acting right. And I think the gods intune themselves to the moment now. They're not waiting in the underworld to measure your heart against a feather or some sort of kind of chthonic concept. No, they're watching now. And that's a big sign of that story, is that oath he made had measurements and effects on the deeds he was doing outside of that oath. Yeah, you can keep an oath to Frey, sure. But if you're acting an ass everywhere else, that oath, yeah, could be used against you in your judgment and your doom by the gods. So 100% on that one. Sorry. Thank you for clarification.
Yes. Allie asks, there was discussion at Yule of horse sacrifice to Freyr, not by killing, but by never letting your best horse work as a sacrifice, only breed. Is there historical context for this type of sacrifice?
So there's a mingling of that. I mean, obviously we know that our ancestors have done horse sacrifices all the way back to the original, the home valley in which we come from, the home dale. But in this case, I think we're referring to a lot of the horse farming up in Iceland, and especially in the Saga, you know, where Freyfaxi is like utilized in the story. That time, horse sacrifices were done more along the lines that you would take some of your best horses, stallions, and all the men folk would gather together in the late summertime, right before the cold, and they would fight the horses. They'd fight them together. And so they would do a fight, and the fight was generally, you know, the horse that ran away was the loser. And so, you know, you had these horses going and they're fighting each other, they're hoofing each other, and the biggest, the baddest horse that was the strongest was bred out from that event. And then oftentimes, and I don't think it was every time, I think it was more along the lines of depending on his age. But if the strong stallion was bred out, and maybe he had won the year before or something, but the ultimate culmination of it is that horse was sacrificed, that the meat was shared with the gods. So there was a cauldron and a boiling of the meat. And so that all the folk there that were gathered, generally, most likely a culminative feast at the end of the event, they would breed out the winner, and then they would kill the winner, and they would butcher it sacrally, and they would share the meat with all the folk gathered in a big feast, with that being the center point of it. And Icelanders are still horse eaters today. Remember, the reason why we don't eat horses like in the West is because it's Judaic law that you're not supposed to eat an animal that doesn't have a cloven hoof. But us Icelanders, or you know, where I come from, and my grandfather owned a horse farm. We only eat the bad ones, as we like to tell foreign folks, just so that makes them feel better. Yeah, we only eat the mean ones, but
Yeah,
in truth,
I grew up on a ranch. We only ate the mean bulls too. It's okay.
right. But yes, yeah, I think that's the culmination of sacrifice that we're talking about is that time frame was done kind of like that. And it wasn't really fully remarked down, but it's referenced to quite a bit, especially in Iceland. So
All right. Human Manipulation Nation asks, I have a question. How do you all recommend we stay true to our faith while amongst non-believers, family, coworkers, strangers during this Christmas season, so we don't just isolate? Okay, I understand. Let me explain a few things to you.
Yep.
When I go home to my family for my grandmother's Christmas weekend, and my entire family bows their head and says the Catholic prayer before meals, I do not bow my head. I sit very respectfully and very, very quietly. But myself and my children do not bow our head. We do not do the sign of the cross. We do not join in the prayer. You will see me and my children do a hammer sign over our own food respectfully, but we do not interrupt their practice. And we do not impose our beliefs on their practice unless we are asked about it, which we always are at some point. But we are respectful. This is not the time for you to get into a spiritual debate. But if you are asked questions, don't shy away from those questions. Be proud of what you're doing and be proud of who you are. Be proud of your folk and be proud of your gods. You can still go to your grandmother's house and share a meal, give gifts, have conversations, drink some homemade wine, and play cribbage and be just fine. I promise it can be done. The more that you talk about your religion and your church and your beliefs as if they are part of an everyday life as they should be, the more people will accept that that is who you are. And you might get asked about Thor at Christmas. It's happened. My family's proud of what I do, even if they don't all share the same religion I do, even if they do not worship the Aesir. My family is proud of what I do. I have family members that are members of the Asatru Folk Assembly. I have family members who have donated to Baldershof and are not part of the Asatru Folk Assembly. And I have a plethora of aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, siblings that support what I'm doing because they know that it brings completion to my life and because it makes me a better person, and they have seen how much more driven I am now that I've found my way home. So my biggest recommendation to you is to talk about this more often so that it's not awkward at grandma's Christmas dinner. And be honest when they ask you questions. Don't be embarrassed. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. Be respectful of where you came from. Those people, depending on your family dynamic, that's still your family. That's still your grandmother. That's still your parents. Be respectful. In time, hopefully that they will understand. But the more you make this real to them, because it's real for you and it's good for you, the more accepting they will be and the less awkward Christmas dinner will be at your grandma's house. Svan?
I definitely think from a family aspect, what you just covered is perfect. So I'll go with the work angle, since that was also in the question. And I would like to point out the biggest thing you just said: don't isolate, which I brought up before. The reason why like the Iron Mark isn't an official calendar is because we use the Gregorian calendar, because everyone uses it, and that's the way we understand things, and that's the way we get work done. So it's kind of a side project, and we don't try to isolate ourselves. And so I will be first and foremost to tell you I am not a fan of Christianity. I'm not a fan of any of the Abrahamic faiths, and I'm quite vocal about it. Anybody who never follows me on Twitter can probably see that a lot. I am shooting from the hip, probably more than I should. But really what it is about a measurement of who comes at you with things. If somebody comes at you respectfully, nicely, and they say, hey, Merry Christmas, I say Merry Christmas right away to all of my coworkers, or not coworkers, but well, I do have coworkers, sort of. I have people that also have their private businesses in my area, but or my clients, when they come in and say Merry Christmas, I say Merry Christmas back, because I understand the meaning of this time of year, and there's so much overlay between our holidays that I it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins, and they certainly often don't know a lot of the Teutonic and Germanic folk faith elements from all over involved in that. So I would say, like, say Merry Christmas when they say Merry Christmas back, but I also say, like, and have a Happy Yule. That's one thing that kind of I wanted to bring up too. There's a lot of folks that talk about Glad Yule. In Iceland, it's Gleðileg Jól. Gleðileg means like merry or happiness. Glad Yule is kind of a modern Western, like Canadian, American, Australian way of saying Gleðileg Jól or Glad Yule. But Happy Yule, Happy Yuletide, Merry Yule, they all have the same meaning as in correlation to Gleðileg or Glad. And so, a lot of times I'll say, like, have a Happy Yuletide, and people are like, oh yeah, oh, you're bringing out the old stuff, and you're like, yes, every year I break it out consistently, like, it's like, so, like, you don't have to really go into it about explaining some strange, this is, or I don't know. I've had a tendency too, where I've talked to my clients, and they've gotten to the point where they're like, oh, you got anything going on for the Christmas holiday? And I'm like, oh yeah, I got 12 things going on. And and they're like, really, 12, like the 12 days of Christmas? And I'm like, yeah, just like the 12 days of Christmas, except we call it Yule. And they're like, oh, really? And they just kind of move into it. Especially, I have found people who are not folk, all of them, are just interested in it. They're generally really nice, and I don't see any point in not sharing what they want to hear, like, as far as like a level of an amount of what they want to hear about the holidays. I don't think it's a time to just jump on the soapbox. I know that's weird for me to say, but yeah, I think I think that going out there and just gauging the moment, but ultimately saying Merry Christmas and a Happy Yuletide is one of the safest things that you could do. I've always led with the ideas, whatever anybody says to me, I say in return, and then say what I celebrate as well. That's, I think, one of the best rules. If they say Merry Christmas to me, I say Merry Christmas to you and a Happy Yuletide. And then most people don't even realize it, because it's still something they understand. And when you're talking about your religion amongst your coworkers and things like that, and around this time, it depends. I celebrate with the Yule Elf, and then others might celebrate with seeing Thor as the Yule father figure of the time frame, or some people might see Odin as the Yule father. And so you could tell people, I think, it's like, well, we have different traditions everywhere. For some folk, but generally there's always the Yule log, the Yule tree, there's the hanging of the mistletoe, and and once you start saying stuff like that, they're like, how is that any different? Exactly. And you move on from there.
Sarah asks, do you already have a vision in your head for a mural at Frey's?
Yes. Next question. No. No. Yeah, absolutely, I do. Yes. One thing is that there's some correlation to Nordhoff. There was talk about that in the initial conception, and so if there's any complaints, please direct them towards Gothi Lane. And you never saw me. No. The biggest thing is that Gothi Lane started the idea of putting Frey and Freya in the mural at Nordhoff, and I was just playing around with some colorations and things and what I wanted to do, and then people started saying, well, you got to carry that over to Freyshof, and I was like, crap. So I kind of got stuck into that. I'm gonna play with some elements, yes, but I do, and I had to be in honesty, joking aside, I had I guess a vision of it to come to my head. I don't want to speak of that as being like perhaps maybe like from outside of myself. I'm not saying that. What I am saying though is that I definitely just kind of had a flash of inspiration of what that image of his Godstead would be. But again, it could change based on the wall. So, it really depends on the building and a lot of what I have to work with. But generally, it always starts with about the sternum up. And, I can say this much, that the inspiration that I got is that there's going to be it's semi profiled look. And, I saw the image kind of in correlation with horse riding, if you will. That's about all I'm going to say on that. But again, that could change. There's nothing concrete about that because of the area I have to work with. So, but yes, colors, formation, and certain things. I know that like a lot of artists nowadays are trying to place, I see a lot of this like Marvelization of the Jotuns with like blue tattoos, and I see the Vana as they're showing the Vana as like having elf ears. I'm assuming because of the correlation of Yngvi Frey being the lord of Ljosalfheim. But it's not going to have any of that. It's more correlated to Njordshof. So everything will kind of be built on an extension of itself.
Beautiful. Return of the Noldor. What do you think about people who try to discredit you from our religion by trying to prove you don't have the knowledge of all ancient Norse history? What am I going to prove? I don't have all of the knowledge of all of ancient Norse history. Nobody does. It's kind of ridiculous to pretend that you do. I'm just saying, but I've read the lore many, many times. And one thing I will tell you is that every time you read that lore, you are going to remember something and learn something every single time you read it. I bet to this day, whenever Witan Svan opens up one of those books, he realizes something else. He knows something else to look up in the ancient texts. He can reference it to another piece of lore, and I bet he grabs a dictionary and can figure out what that word means a little bit better. If you stop learning, you're done. We are never going to know everything. And if you think that you know everything, you're done. But what I will say to you is if we can get into a lore debate and you seem to think that you can pick some obscure sentence out of an obscure text and try to baffle me with it, I'm going to ask you when the last time you held a bloat was. I'm going to ask you when the last time you saw the tears of a woman as you hailed the gods. I'm going to ask you when the last time you held a child of our folk in your arms and gave them a name for the folk to recognize. I'm going to ask you when the last time you built a hof was. I'm going to ask you how much you pay of your hard-earned money every day as a gift to your gods. I'm going to ask you how many people were at your house celebrating with you at Yule. I'm going to ask you what the point is. That's what I'm going to do. Svan, what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, I guess if you're talking about people, I see that thrown a lot. It's low-hanging fruit, first and foremost. Yes, for somebody to say you don't have, perhaps if you don't have a grasp of the entire corpus of all of that stuff. And again, like I don't have it at all. But
me either.
It's been a long time, and I got a lot of stuff in there, but it all gets jumbled up. So, that's low-hanging fruit against you. And you should you should laugh at people for, oh, wow, look at you. You're cute. You're hitting me on I can hit you on that as well. Because I mean, it's like you talk to anybody in any other correlative religion, most of them haven't read the Bible. Most of them haven't read the fullness of the Bible. They cherry picked things they needed. And then the rest of it is, When we talk about lore versus doing, if I'm arguing with someone or debating someone about religiosity, whether it's within the faith or across the faith, like say Christianity or Judaism or Islam, the one thing that I would say is that I have more respect again for the practitioner, the person who's doing orthopraxy, than the clerical ecclesiastical scholar living in the basement. So lore is kind of a funny thing. Like I have a lot of knowledge about the Bible, so I'll debate with people about things, and I soon find out they don't know a lot, they haven't read a lot, or they've only read what they needed to read. But if they're still faithful, I mean, that argument I can't pick on them for their faith. That's not low-hanging fruit. So again, what Witan Callahan said was, your deeds and your faith towards the gods is, I think, the first and foremost foundation in which you must build on. And then your relationship through lore and through study and through questions and things like that will come later. When you have people, questioning the validity of your religion, saying like, oh, you don't have a grasp of everything, is like, I don't want to give the mom like kind of thing where it's like, they pay them no mind, and they're probably just projecting their inadequacies on you. But in a way, it's kind of like that. And so, I would say, if you feel like you're lacking, utilize it. That's the best advice I can give you. If you feel like you're lacking in knowledge and you feel like you're lacking in orthopraxy, you're not doing enough and you're not remembering enough, well, guess what you got to do? Do more and remember more. And just every time you get hit, take that in and use it to get more. If that's what you're encountering, you might, there's nothing I can tell you that will stop that from happening to you as far as like getting in debates with people. But every time you take a hit, take it. And
you know what? I'm just going to take my comeuppance now. I can't pronounce the names either. That's Svan's job, and he has to walk me through it like Hooked on Phonics. So that's okay.
I'm big on the linguistics part. I'm not an Old Norse fan, actually. Like I try to promote the idea of at least anglicizing, and I think that our people that were doing interpretations of the Norse were anglicizing, and I like English. I think it's a cool language. But yes, like you might have trouble with linguistics. Again, too, hey, shoot me a message if you need any help with anything. Always shoot me just like a text or something, or a message. You can message me over on Twitter, and I've helped people out with little bits of verse or pronunciations. And I would say too, get it from multiple sources. Find out different people and what they take on it, because just like Odin, let no shadow go uninspected. So find all multiple sources. Dig your elbows on the table and listen, and from all over. So
awesome. Rare opportunity to ask Brandy about her favorite 5 books, any topic, not counting Eddas, rune books, and lore. Okay, we're about to show you how much of a nerd your Witan is. I'm going to show you my first one here.
Oh, you're pulling them down. I got them right here.
I'm proud of this one, Svan.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. That is by far one of my favorites, and it's well loved. It is.
That's the one that has a lot of the Arthur Rackman. Is it Arthur Rackman pictures in there?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes. See?
Yes.
Yes.
I love him as an artist. Yes. Phenomenal.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. This is in my top 5 books. Like it's very worn. In all honesty, one of my other favorite books, and like I said, you can laugh at me later, the Little House on the Prairie books. Love Little House on the Prairie books. I loved them from the time I was a kid. My grandmother used to read them to me, so that might be a really big reason why I like them. I still read them as an adult. So my other book that I have read so many times that it's literally on its seventh new version is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Big fan.
Ooh.
Let's see, what else do I like? Because we're not talking just religious books, right? I guess other than the lore and the sagas and stuff like that, books that I like for like academic study. Look at me just pulling books off my shelf. I apologize. The Viking Age. This is a good book. You have to remember it's academic and not written from a religious point of view, and that it was also published in 1889. So you need to remember we are modern people. This is not a modern book. So it has a lot of academic information. I like that. Is that 4? That's 4. Starship Troopers.
It's a favorite of mine as well.
Yes. Those are my top 5. Judge as you will.
Yeah, doesn't it feel weird like when you start, you're like, oh, now I'm getting exposed and I can't really, like, you can't throw flack on that. You just have to kind of press forward.
I can't pretend I didn't hear the question because Nick will remind me that it's there. But yes, so there we go. You know, I love old folklore, like the Brothers Grimm. I absolutely adore folklore. Little House on the Prairie, Starship Troopers, Pride and Prejudice. I don't travel anywhere. If you go to an event, like if I travel for a national event, that book is in my backpack. I promise. It's there.
It's been a long time since I've read that. So it's like, I really want to like kind of go back and read it.
That's wonderful.
Do it for Yule.
Yep.
I did want to say there was some stuff going on over here. I'm looking at these comments coming in. Some of them are really cool. I know the name thing really like stirred a hornet's nest. And you know, when we talk about Victory Never Sleeps, we say, you know, it's like we're going to talk about Freyr. Man, we go all over the place every podcast. So, and I know that, you know, there's different levels of lore and stuff that people know, but I wanted to say too that there was mentioning about changing your names. The idea of utilizing, you know, somebody said, you know, change your name from a biblical name if you've got one and all of that. I wanted to make a comment on that since I'm seeing all of this conversation going on. One thing for everyone to know, like I changed my name from the Icelandic version to an anglicized version because my name in Icelandic is hard for English mouths to pronounce. And so I you know, and in Iceland too, a lot of times we always, like in English, we make nicknames. You know, if your name is Vala Björk, you might be just called Vala, or you know, and if your name is Christiana, you might be Christabit, you know, like a little bit, or, you know, that's my aunt's nickname. And so there's, you know, and like my other uncle's name is Svanberg, but we call him, you know, Sampi. So it's like, you know, we have these nicknames, but a lot of people in Asatru, I think, keep their biblical style names, not because they're any connection to the Bible, is because they were given for people that are in their family. And I totally respect that. I think that's a good thing. I'm named after my grandfather. And, you know, being the Swan, it's not the toughest of names, you know. It's like, I mean, I guess unless you piss off a swan or something, but it's like, but, you know, it's like, it's not like my brother's name, which means falcon. And that's Valur is such a cooler name. But anyways, they, you know, if you have a name that has meaning in your family, I would say consider before you change it. I think it's important too that people kind of utilize their real names. Don't hide behind pseudonames and things like that. I think that's kind of passe. It's an old thing. A lot of people say, you know, I'm shirking my Christian name and I want to take on my Viking name. Don't forget too, Anglo names are freaking awesome. You know, like the names that I think people have tried to tell us are stupid or nerdy, like Herbert. Herbert is an awesome, it means bright warrior. That is such a cool freaking name. You know, go to behind the name. They got great stuff there. You can learn a lot about Albert, meaning all bright, and Edgar meaning wise spear striker. I mean, these are awesome freaking names. Onum. Nick, I wanted to let you know too, yeah, your name is Greek. So it's not biblical, even though obviously it was used by a lot of people during Saul of Tarsus and his time in the Greek areas with Philip, of course, Philiopus, the friendly horse is what that name means, and Nicholas. But if you do decide to change your name, do it legally. So that way it's up front. It's not a pseudonym. Go to your courthouse. If you don't have any particular attachment to your name, go there, do it legally, and then people can respect you from there on out and understand that that's your legal name. I understand that. Just don't, my name is David or Joshua. It starts with when you have your children, name them Teutonic names. That's it. My son one son has a German name. My daughter has an Etruscan name, and my other son has an Anglo-Saxon name. So, I mean, it's up to you to change things. And, it's like, I didn't name my children Icelandic names. So it's, take it for what it is. I just wanted to clarify some of all that chat. At least I've been looking at it and it's interesting.
Yeah. Lawrence Forbes gave us another $10 Canadian and says, I think that was good advice you both gave on relating to family and work at this time of year. My approach is to do the best to keep the Christ out of Christmas, but furthermore, to never utter that name unless it's a serious discussion trying to expose the person what a scam Judo-Christianity is. So I appreciate that $10, sir. Keep that.
Yeah,
keep
Canada.
You donate a lot. We appreciate that very, very much. But as far as keep the Christ out of Christmas, I'd recommend Germanization of Christianity.
Yeah, the Christianization of early medieval Christianity, yes. I think is the full title.
It's up there. Yes, I would recommend that book.
Phenomenal book.
Absolutely read that book. It's really, really great, and
there's a reason it's required reading for the yes. Goth author. That is.
It's a good book. It's a good book. But thank you very much, sir. We appreciate that. Let's see. Stian, I'd like to hear the Witan's thoughts on Freyr's stand against Surtur at Ragnarok and what he can glean from the mythology. Before we do that, I want to throw up Folk Builder Christian Penner's artwork of this. I think it's great. So.
Awesome. It looks like a tattoo. I can definitely see the boar too, right there, riding upon Gullinbursti.
Yes. So, what do you think, sir? Why don't you give that to us? For us.
Well, I mean, when you talk about correlative powers and seeing the overall layers of chaos versus order, repeatedly over and over and over again, whether we're talking about Fenris or Jormungandr or Surt. And one of the biggest things that in the cosmology of our faith, the one world that is not nearby or seen as a far off element is Muspelheim. And Muspelheim is a great mystery, I think, linguistically and historically. There's references to it even in medieval Europe, about the sons of Muspel and what even Muspel means. But in general sense, the land of fire, cosmic fire, the initiation spark / termination spark, if you will, if we're talking about like grand kind of quantum and cosmic physics. When we see, first and foremost, and this is what I was going to get at earlier, I had made a hint towards it, is understanding in our cosmology that the upper world and the lower world are sandwiching the middle, and the middle world is a correlative connection point between multiple realms that focus in on what is the material. So we have like 4 spiritual realms surrounding the mundane world. And so when we talk about the Veralta god Frey being the god of the world, and we're talking about his bounty, his vegetative powers, the power of life and of rebirth and of fertility and all of these things, what I think we see is the upper realm, the realm of light and of light. I mean, of life and of light being transcendent against the flame of purging. And so we see a direct correlation of the middle world fighting against the cosmic fire that's coming. And again, we see like Niflheim and Helheim are connected, and they're in the lower. And then we see the 4 Nexus worlds in the material, and then we see, of course, Himmen or Heavenum, heaven, and then Muspelheim is the one that's way off, and it slowly correlates itself back towards Niflheim, and everything lights itself on fire. And I think what we're kind of seeing is life against the consumptive flame. I think also, too, it's worth noting that if we were to look at it not in a cosmic way, but in a terrestrial way or an earth way, a yarding way, in the yarding sense, we would see it again as like fire when the seeds drop, as a flame passes through the forest. And I mean, there's long studies knowing that flame and forestry are connected. I think our ancestors knew it, could see it, and understood fertile ground coming from the forest that received the kiss of the flame. So in a weird, and I mean, in a binding sense of the way this story correlates its wisdom is through Weird constantly restating that we're talking about the seed of germination after the flame. Another interesting thing, of course, is the story elements of Freyr. Freyr slays Surt with an antler. It's mentioned that his sword, which, again, I really do, Freyr's such a, story-wise, dynamically, he's awesome as a fighter. He's not, a lot of people try to cram him into this sense of him being some like dainty thing. They seem to do that with a couple, Baldur and with Freyr too. We get this kind of like, sense of stuff. Really what they're pulling from a Christian who was trying to defame the worship of Frey. So he said, that the priests looked effeminate because they were wearing these long tunics and they had bells on. Of course, we see correlation with Alvar honoring through bells, bronze bells. But so they're reinforcing this. No, Freyr is not that at all. I mean, there's a reason why he rides his horses called Bloden Hova, the bloody hooves. And that's not because he ran it so hard that it's bleeding. It's because it's from the battlefield. And he had a sword that fought on its own. I mean, he was the best and the brightest of the Ausas before he gave up his sword. He was I always like in my storytelling, and things like that, I try to paint I think the spirit of Freyr, seeing him as the young warrior on the battlefield, laughing and swinging his sword and riding in fury, completely and totally into the moment of this time. I mean, the wise Vanir are battle wise. And so, I think it's interesting though, when we talk about the giving of the sword and the attainment of the staghorn, that's an interesting one. I mean, obviously the loss of the sword is mentioned in giving his sword to gain the love of Gerda. And it's never actually physically said that that's given up in Skirnismal, but it's referenced later on. The taking up of the antler is an interesting one. I mean, there could be correlations. I think that's why, like, speaking of the Iberian Peninsula and Cernunnos, the Celtic god with the antlers on his head, or I think Herne the hunter amongst the English, like, folklore is also said to have antler horns. And yes, there could be correlations to Wuldor or Uller and Frey on that one. I think it's just more or less interesting to think of as like a fashioned weapon, an elder weapon. It's one of the only times in which you see in our stories the degradation of technology. Like with Thor, we know the bronze axe, we know the bronze hammer. And then, of course, we know about Gridavold, the Iron Rod, and then eventually moving into Mjolnir. But with Freyr, you see this de-escalation in technology, a kind of reverting back to the primordial life. As far as the mysticism, and that I'm not 100% sure is maybe what our ancestors were trying to portray in the idea of him, gacking search with a sorry, gacking is such an unofficial term, but just driving it home with a staghorn is I think truly an interesting thing, and I think it might mean again another drive towards the primordial desire to survive, where the same equivalency is I lost my gun, so I pull off my helmet, or I hit with a shovel, or I throw a rock, or it's just that primordial essence to survive, and you're fighting against Surtur with the that scary flaming sword, and just the primordial will to live. That's the way I've always taken that. But again, very, very interesting, and I wonder if it is allegoric towards the flash burning and the germination of the forest too. Again, perennial truths of myth. They have truths in multiple levels in all times. Is Ragnarok happening? Has it happened, and will it happen? Yes. It's all cyclical. So
the Alshira Gothi asks, Svan, did you tell them about the festive pig face eating?
No, but I will.
Go ahead.
Oh, I see he's watching.
He's always watching.
Yes. That was a shot across the bow. Just remember. No. So I have on my on the 12 nights of Yule, because we know that like when you separate the days of the week, when we talk about the old, when we talk about Sunnusdag and Mánisdag and Tyrsdag, Odinsdag, Thorsdag, and then most likely it was Frykasdag or Friksdag, because in correlation to the Romans they had Isis for Friday. So if we're looking at a strong feminine figure of the goddesses, that would be probably correlative. But Mother's Night is dedicated to Frigga. So on the 12th night, we went with Frey and Freya's night, or Frey's night, just to keep it simple. And on that night, I buy, or not on that night, I buy it. Actually, I haven't bought it yet, but I'm going to the meet the slaughterhouse here in Chesapeake, Virginia, where I live. I buy a pig's head. And so what I usually do is there's a lot of recipes for it. It's a very traditional meal amongst Yule. If you look up some of the old Victorian iconography, you will see plum pudding and pig's heads or boar's heads on the table. And so there's lots of recipes out there. Some of them are really cool if you're an adventurous eater, as I am. Lathering the porcine flesh with lots of salted butter and cloves in little X marks, and then frying it. It comes out like almost like bacon, and then eating the jowl. And I do eat the tongue, cutting a pork tongue and then eating it with mint jelly is amazing. But yes, on that night we cook a pig's head and glaze it and crisp it up and eat the skin like bacon, eat the jowls, which are very soft meat, and then of course eating the tongue. And the tradition of it is kind of like, we don't necessarily do this all the time because of course oaths are very serious, but New Year's resolutions placed upon the boar's head, which comes from an old Anglo-Saxon tradition of the hunt over Yule for the wild boar, and the warriors placing an oath upon the boar's head that they just hunted. So it's kind of a reflection of that tradition. But yeah, that's my 12th night. And then of course we take the Yule flame and go outside and light a big bonfire and hail Frey and hail Freya for the new and upcoming year. So
Stephen Monday asks, what do you think is the importance of the Volsung Saga? I was always told it is the hardest to read, but one of the best. It is one of the best, and it's one of the most famous. I mean, this is the one, Svan, that Tolkien himself was inspired on, is it not? I mean, there's
absolutely
you can
tons of elements.
Yeah, you can see a lot of what Tolkien used out of the Volsung saga. There's a lot of appearances by the gods, and there's a lot of mix of, what's the right word? There's a lot of magical things that happen, you know. It's a great saga. It's long and hard to read, but it's great. I mean, it's absolutely great. I think it's very, very important. It shows how, I think part of it shows how our spirituality mixes with the magical things, the sage things, and that shows how that mixes in there. And you don't see that very often. So that's one thing I like. What about you, Swan?
I think the overlap there is really important. It blows my mind, like when you read about it and you read about the figure Atli, and then realizing that most likely is Attila, and other characters in the story being the king of the Goths, or other things of that nature. So there's a lot of stuff in relation to we have a baby emergency. Sorry folks, I know anybody who's a parent would understand completely. But yeah, you see a correlative like overlapping of historical figures, and some of them clearly weren't alive from what we know at the same time. But in the story, even though it's not actually the same person, or at least it's leaning towards or pulled from them as an inspiration, they're overlapped there. I think that's a really cool aspect of the story. The other thing is I mean, there are key elements, especially runic stuff. There's some things in there in which, when Sigurd reaches and gets mystical knowledge from the Valkyrie, it's an interesting thing too in and of itself, because we don't necessarily see the Valkyries a lot in other aspects, but he's very, very clear a story point of it. But I think ultimately the biggest thing is it's a tragic story about someone going through great deeds and making proclamation, and then not following through on it completely and owning the situation, instead of, like, it's kind of like a faultiness of coming back. And then what ends up happening is once that's the tragedy, instead of following through and taking the full-on destiny, the treasure of the of weird and of fate before you, there's this moment where he steps back, and that ends up causing all kinds of problems when he goes and he gets his mind messed with, and then he forgets about her, he forgets about the Valkyrie, and then he ends up representing someone else, and she remembers him for who he is, and this causes a series of events. So I mean, it's a great tragic story with lots of great elements, both from the material and history, and also spiritual, and I would even say magical, like in the proper term.
James says, and we covered this a little bit already, but James puts in here today, hello, I have always looked at Freyfaxi as being more about the importance of being frugal when making oaths because of the weight and responsibility that comes with them.
Yeah, 100%. I that's a great lesson. And again, the focus on the saga is not, I would say, a huge part of modern Asatru's take on it. I think it is worth noting, and if you definitely know the saga, that's even better. However, ultimately, it's the celebration of the end of the harvest time. So when you take about a lot of these things, generally, at Thorshof, it's we joke and say it's the carb slayer holiday, where there's bread and beer, and if you're on like a low carb diet, you might as well just give up. Like it's just throw in the towel for the day. But at the same time, what is it? I mean, we're talking about, I understand what you're saying about it religiously, and especially in context of the saga. And I would say definitely, if you meet other Asatru who don't know about the saga and about the oath that Freyr made on the horse and all of that, that's good. I talk about it a lot during Freyfaxi in and of itself, but the horse represents something more, especially when we make the bread horse and we break it into pieces and we eat it. We're talking about the fertility of the last cutting time, the last sheaf, the last little gift that's given, that's going to be held and is going to be carried over to charming of the plow the next year for the fields to grow. So, if somebody doesn't know about the story, don't hold it against them. I would say teach them if you can, but remember it is our harvest festival. It's very important. Loaf mass, and it's a fun time. But yes, oaths are serious, and I think in the AFA we don't take a lot of oaths. I know like a lot of people do oaths during Symbol and things like that, and I've noticed, especially in my time in the Asatru Folk Assembly, there's not a lot of oath taking done. It's done more officially when you take your position as a folk builder. It's more official when you take your position as a Gothar. These oathing moments are really, really important. Otherwise, getting a Gothi to preside over an oath has been a big thing in the AFA as well, because I think a lot of folk, when they do take an oath, we have a priesthood, we have Gothar, and so they seek the Gothar out and say, hey, can you be present for this? Sometimes every temple has an iron ring, and that iron ring they want to hold an oath on. But it's not super, super common at all. And I think that lesson, what you're saying, is very important. You have people that come into Asatru and they are edgelords, or they're just very rebellious towards where they're coming from, and they want to throw around oaths and, just be as Viking as possible in this kind of like play mindset of like, I'm going to oath on, this bear skull, brother, for forever to do and be with you, no matter how detrimental your life might be, because you're, being crazy. People like just say and do crazy things, and they need to understand that oaths aren't done like that. They're very important. And again, they leave in wake in your weird things that the gods can mete out your doom with quite easily if you're not following correct action. So yeah, good lesson though.
Yes. Nick says, and since we're bringing up festivities, and you mentioned the 12 days earlier, what's the deal? You've got a set. Founder McNallen has his version. Get the Acades written about her family's set inspired by yours. And what are your 12 days of Yule? What are the 12 days of Yule?
Okay. So Founder McNallen had the candle lighting ceremony on YouTube. Pretty much. I mean, that's almost like I think like back when YouTube was really just taking off. Mm-hmm. And I have incorporated that because I wasn't always in the Asatru Folk Assembly, but had my Yule tradition. So you find a lot of what's happening in Asatru is things are coming together. I know Alistair Agothi's waiting for me to say it, but I'll say it once. Things galvanize. Like, I love that word. No, it comes together. Things are coming together. What you end up having is principalities or different areas, all having their own traditions. And unfortunately, different elements. Like some people might pull from a German Alp tradition, more of something for them that they like. And then somebody else might have more of a Norwegian, maybe Swedish. And then other might have an Icelandic or, just an overall kind of Germanic tradition. So you get all these traditions everywhere. And I'm not necessarily saying that any of them are right or wrong. I think that what's happening is on the other end, is people are coming into the faith and going, what do we do? Like, I want to do something. This is my first time. I'm coming into the faith. I'm coming back home. What's Yule about? And when you like pick a card, people are like, oh, crap. Like they don't exactly know what to do. So my Yule tradition is not based off the Icelandic Yule tradition. I grew up celebrating Yule, and of course there's Grilla and all that stuff. And I've already marked on that about in other podcasts about the scary caricatures and how I'm not really into them. Not saying that either way, but the Yule tradition that I have been practicing for almost 15 years, I think, if I count correctly. And it formulated itself over about 5 years. and it just grew more and more. Again, Yule is an interesting topic. You'll get the basement wizards saying, it's three nights, and during Yule month, and all that stuff. And the 12 nights is the Eucharist, and that's a Christian thing. And it's like, well, we can't really tell where, did they pull that from us, because there was never really a correlative holiday in Christianity before it came to Europe about the Eucharist and Three Kings Day and the 12 nights after the 25th, which is celebrated in like Ukraine and Russia and also in some South American countries and things like that, where the Catholics and the Orthodox are. But when we talk about the 12 nights of Yule, it was a correlation sense of like, okay, well, if the year is a macro of the microcosm of the week, basically we're messing around with time on Yule because it's the turning of the year. So the day represents the year, or the seasons represent the year, or the year represents times. So there's a play of micro and macro in there. And what ended up kind of correlating from my Yule tradition is that if you look at the days of the week, minus Lagerstag, which is wash day, the day in which you did all your chores and things, there was 6 days, and if you put a day in between those days, you get 12. So and it was such an easy way to remember it, because if you can remember what comes after Sunday, which is Monday, and you understand that there's a day in between, all you have to do is memorize 6 days and you got the rest. You got all 12. Bang. And so I was, like I teach my son, and so he can remember it, is understanding that, we start out with Mother's Night. So if Mother's Night is the first night that we do it, then the first day of the week is Suna's Day. So that's the 21st, which is the solstice. Makes perfect sense. So after Mother's Night, on Suna's Day, we burn sun wheels in the fire in the morning and give bloat to the sun and to the darkest time. We keep a flame from the Yule log on Mother's Night, burning one flame, and I utilize that flame in Founder McNallen's candle lighting ceremony. I meditate on the virtues in the morning. So Yule is 12 days from morning to night. I hold bloat at night usually, and in the morning, and I say usually because it can depend. Sometimes you go to there's a birthday party I go to, and we hold we celebrate the Landvatir on that night. So that's his birthday, and so we do it kind of whenever we can. But so we have a set thing, put up the mistletoe, and I have a tradition about that where I have to steal the mistletoe from some place. That's become a family tradition. I'm not recommending that to people. I don't want you to get arrested and be like, the guy on YouTube told me to steal it. No, but it's a tradition of mine in which we always scope out mistletoe in the trees, and I've done it to where I've the first time I did it, I was chased off of a guy's lawn with a ladder. I've sent my son up into trees. It's been a fun tradition, but hanging the mistletoe and shaking and embracing your brothers under the mistletoe. Giving a kiss on the forehead or the cheek to your loved ones, or giving an actual kiss to your wife or your children. That's part of it. Hanging the wreath up, in protection of this dark time. It is the end of the wild hunt. Up until, Odin's night in my Yule tradition, the wild hunt is still going, and it gets worse and worse and worse until right before on Odin's night. So, placing the wreath up in protection, carrying the flame, and then transferring that flame when that candle gets low, making sure it doesn't go out. And if it does go out, I actually, my other folk around me have the flame as well. And that's part of that tradition, is if your flame goes out, your kinfolk come over with a flame from theirs and they relight your flame, letting people know, there's a lot of elements in my Yule tradition. It's a long class. I will be holding it at Thor's Hof, but there's basically the days are Mother's Night, Suna's Day in the morning, we burn a sun wheel, and then we rest because we're up all night on Mother's Night, and all the festivities have just started. So the second day is kind of just like we hail the sun, and then we take a break. So I usually take off on the 21st. And the 20th I do for logistic reasons, but we practice at night. And after everything is set, the next night is Nertha's night, or she could be Jorth, the mother of Thor, the earth. I call her Nertha, which is a derivative or an anglicization of Nerthus. And that day's like a cleaning day. We clean the hearth fire. The menfolk, menfolk. I'll use myself as an example. I'll go out and rake leaves, chop them up, do things in the yard, clean things up, get my wood piles set up, make sure the chickens are winterized completely, and just do things like that. My wife will do things like, she tends to the kids. We clean the house. She does, she's doing like all kinds of stuff during that time, washing drapery and couch covers and things that I can't even figure out how to fold. So, but that's her power. That's where she's at. So I'm outside doing all that other stuff and getting my garden ready for spring. So that's Nertha's. And then the next night is Sunday, and then Nertha's night, there's Mani's day. So I always kind of correlate those three as sun, earth, and moon. Mani's night is when I prep my full moon on the iron mark. I go through and I look at the full moons and count them out. So that way I can get my moons for the next coming year. And then I hold blow to Mani. And then the next night after that, we go into Ancestors Night, which is the 24th on the Gregorian calendar. And that's when the Yule Elf brings the gifts from the ancestors. And they're placed under the tree in the morning. They're there when the kids come down. They see all the gifts from the ancestors. And then we take our gifts that we're going to gift exchange to each other. So there's two sets of gifts, or actually three. There's the ancestors' gifts under the tree that the Yule Elf delivered on his Yule Bach. There's the gifts he's placed in the stockings for the kids. And then there's the gifts that we're going to give to each other, because the Yule Elf does not like miserly children or miserly folk. It's about gift giving to your kin. So, we tell the kids that if they're miserly or greedy, they're going to get charcoal and burnt wood in their stockings. But yeah, the ancestors' gifts are open that night. So the kids have to kind of learn patience, they don't touch them in the morning. They actually wait all day while the presents are there. And we take our gift giving presents and put them down next to the ancestors, the past and the present together. And at night, we bring down all the photos of the ancestors, and then we open up the ancestors' gifts first. And the ancestors always send gifts to the kids that are sweaters, socks, books, writing utensils, because they care about the future of the line. And so my kids love their gifts from the ancestors. My son still talks about the wool socks that his great grandmother gave him a couple Yules back. So it's a beautiful time to talk about your ancestors to your children. And then you go into the gift exchange and, give each other gifts based off of, homemade gifts are best, I think, or just things like last year, my son received his first firearm. He got a small 22 rifle. It was a big event. So, that was a big thing for me to give to my son. So that's Ancestors Night. And then we move into Tears Night, because again, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday with one in between. So Tears Night, of course, honoring Tyr. Then we have Einherjar's Night and Woden's Night, and I call those the Warriors 3. And Tears Night is I think for me is a very an emotional time about praying for our folk and for our people and for our nations. And I think, then we move into Einherjar's Night, which is for me, I've lost some friends overseas. So Einherjar's Night is pretty big for me. But at the same time, too, I also, that night, during Einherjar's Night, I recommend, like my son will look up like a Medal of Honor recipient or a famous hero, like I'm doing Mosby, the gray ghost of the Confederacy. And for this year for Einherjar's Night. And I will actually tell the kids about him. And then we hold the bloat to the Einherjar, and then we conclude it for the night. Woden's Night is the end of the wild hunt. So that night, the children usually go out with me and we'll place apple slices out for the horses of the returning of the wild hunt. And usually I'll leave out a small shot of mint schnapps. That's a personal tradition of mine. that's been going on for a very long time. And then that's usually the night of auguries for Yule. You know, if you think about a lot of the European traditions of like reading pewter, drippings in the water, reading candle waxing, you know, any sort of auguries, cartomancy, and other things like that are done on Woden's night. And they, you know, they're those nights are it's a night of mystery. It's a night of conclusion. It's an understanding that Odin has returned back to heaven after riding his wild hunt. And once he does that, of course, stepping down is Uller. So the next night is Uller's night. So you see, it's like there's a day and a night is as far as the title goes. Mother's Night, Suna's Day. Nertha's Night, Mani's Day. Ancestor's Night, Tyr's Day. And it goes on like this. So, and there's, you know, Odin's Night, and then there's Uller's Night the following, and that's usually the end of the hunting season. Put away all your weapons, clean them, put them away. I use it as a firearms safety night for my son, and now my daughter is starting to learn as well, as she's coming of age to understand this is how it works. This is what it is. It's a dangerous thing, and you know, give that class. And my son's starting to get familiar with, you know, how to clean and do things and respecting weapons. I showed him how to sharpen a knife last year. That was like I showed him how to sharpen a knife, and we gave hail to Uller, and that was pretty much it. So it doesn't have to be huge. Thor's Day, though, is generally, if you're a brewer, mead brewer, beer brewer, that's usually the day during Yule that I recommend, because we pitch yeast in all of our buckets, and that mead will probably be ready by Ostara. So if you do your stuff on Thor's night and pitch it then, you'll have it ready by Ostara. And so it's every day is a devotional thing that can help, whether it's cleaning the fireplace or doing other things like that. Like Thor's night, you know, we usually eat lamb and we pitch the yeast, and everybody brings beer that they want to showcase that night. So it's a big night at the house. And then Landwhite's night is generally outside, and what we do, the kids will smear peanut butter and birdseed on pine cones, hang them up in the tree, biscuits on ribbons up in the tree or in the bushes, kind of just feeding the birds and the local, you know, animals that are struggling this time of year. And then, of course, lastly, after Landwhite's night is Frey's night, and that's the night where we take that flame we've been nursing for 12 days, you know, making sure it doesn't go out. And, you know, I keep it safe in a pot of water inside my fireplace. You know, when I'm not burning a fire, I'll take it out when I do. But light a torch with that flame and take it outside, and you light a bonfire on the last night after you eat your pig's head. You know, it's a big thing to like make sure you don't blow your light out before you know, if you have that torch lit, make sure you keep that light on. So, because I've gone outside and woof, the wind. Oh, you know, then you have to run back inside to light it again. So, lesson learned last night: don't blow that out after you light the torch. Go out, light the bonfire. And my hope is that eventually, one day, this tradition will be embraced by many folk, and from the temples, they'll gain their Yule log lights, their flames, or the ash in order to make a fire. And they go home and they light a fire at home. And then at the end, when the gods look down upon where the folk are, they'll see lights, all lighting at the end of Yule. So that's a very brief synopsis of my Yule tradition.
We did a candle blessing on the last day that we had Yule at Baldershof, where we lit our folk flame like we always do, but we blessed candles to send home with people, and we put those candles off at the folk flame. And, you know, I mean, I get they can't leave that lit all the time, but we did tell them, before you extinguish this flame, first you must light it in your soul, and may it be burned bright and strong, even if this candle's not lit. So anytime you extinguish one of those flames, make sure that you are intentionally lighting it within yourself before you extinguish that flame.
Yeah, and that's another thing, logistics of the temples and of the timing too, because we have to converge for most people. So like, even though Yule starts on the 20th, you know, we're getting together the weekend before, or some people have already gotten together because that's the time that they got to do this. So yeah, I mean, and you know, if if you have that sacred flame that you keep from the temple, and you can light a Yule log at your home and start, or just keep it, and understand that, it's like you're not going to commit some great sin if it has to adapt because of certain things. And I definitely see that. That's another reason why we have those traditions so regionally, is because certain things might not work out. Charming the plow in Minnesota is a hard thing to do in the ground when it's covered by like inches of ice.
Inches of ice and feet of snow. And
yeah.
You're not planting anything inside. Unless it's inside, you're not planting in February. You're not doing anything in February except trying to stay warm. So
right. I think the biggest thing is my attempt at teaching this Yule tradition is to give people something that they can see has been practiced. It has tradition. It has a lot of coalescing elements, but it's a baseline. And then, based on certain things, based on whether you're near temples, whether you're by yourself, whether you have children or not. The Yule elf might not be a big thing if you don't have children. So there's lots of stuff. It's just a baseline to cover everything. And then you can go with what you got, just celebrate and do, and you can do no wrong. So.
Well, that looks like that is all the questions that we have got from the chat tonight.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Svan. It is always a pleasure to listen to you and to learn from you. Every time you open your mouth, I learn something new. So I appreciate all the time and effort that you put into this. I really do. So thank you very much for being here, sir.
Thank you so much. And hail Frey. I know we base our stuff off the questions and how, what people are throwing at us. But again, too, we know that a lot of people come at this from different angles. If you have questions about the gods, make sure you throw them up there. But if you have your knowledge about the gods and you're just more interested in talking about what we're doing and things of that nature, hey, thank you. And thank you to Canada for being so giving tonight.
Yes, Canada, thank you for your generosity. We very much appreciate that.
Our northern brothers.
All right. Everyone, you guys have a great week. We'll do this again next week. And remember, until then, victory never sleeps. Hail the gods, hail the folk, and hail the AFA.
Hail.
Bye, everybody.